At least I do.
Speak for yourself.
Yes.
Yeah, but don't speak for the rest who don't do it. So in respect to your own script, Moi doesn't owe us an explanation. He's being a politician to reform.
He is...
Commissioner Fire, very candidly, did you at any point feel you were brought in just to flavor the commission or just to add a sort of compromise to the commission and just for effect, for cosmetic nature? Right. Back in studio, I have invited more guests to join us. This is in my quest to just get further understanding of what is happening, especially that now everything is apolitical. And I'm happy. Today, we'll take a little more detail of it. If you are hearing some sounds of the background, that's just our plans getting on the way.
By the mid-2000s, Louis Otieno had become one of the most recognizable faces on Kenyan television. His voice was familiar, his face was familiar, and when he sat across from a powerful guest, viewers knew they were about to watch something different. Louis had built a reputation for being confident, direct, and unafraid to push difficult conversation. He moved through some of Kenya's biggest media houses and became one of the country's most talked about television personalities. At the height of his career, Louis seemed to have everything a television star could want. A successful career, money, influence, and a level of fame that made him almost impossible to ignore. But the Louis Otieno people remember from those years is very different from the man who would emerge later. Somewhere along the way, the television screens went quiet. The career that had taken years to build began to fall apart. His name became connected to a controversy that attracted national attention. And away from the cameras, Louis would face the battle that had nothing to do with television. The story would eventually involve a young woman's mysterious death, a career that came crashing down, serious health problems, financial struggles, and a life far removed from the spotlight. But how did one of Kenya's biggest television personalities go from commanding the screen to almost disappearing from public life? This is the story of the fall of Louis Otieno. Louis Otieno's journey into television was not the usual story of someone who had planned his entire life around becoming a celebrity journalist. Before broadcasting became his world, he had worked outside the media industry. But television gave Louis something different, a platform, and he knew how to use it. By the 2000s, his name was becoming increasingly familiar to Kenyan viewers. He moved through major media houses, including KBC, KTN, K24, and Citizen TV. And with every move, his profile became bigger. Louis was not the kind of presenter who simply sat behind a desk and read whatever appeared on a teleprompter. He had a personality, he changed people, he pushed conversation, he could make an ordinary interview feel important. That confidence became one of the biggest reasons audiences remembered him. But it also divided opinions. Some viewers admired his confidence, others thought he was arrogant. Louis never seemed interested in making himself smaller to please everybody. And by the time he reached the height of his career, he had become much more than an employee of a television station. He had become a brand. By the late 2000s, Louis had something most television presenters spend years trying to build: recognition. He could move between stations and still remain relevant because viewers knew him. His interviewing style had become part of his identity, his confidence had become part of his image, and his ability to handle powerful guests made him one of the personalities people associated with serious Kenyan television. But success came with another side. Louis had strong opinions about journalism. He also had strong opinions about how television should be produced. That sometimes brought him into conflict with the people running the station where he worked. Yet for years, those conflicts did not destroy his career. Louis had something to fall back on: his reputation. If one opportunity ended, another could appear. If one station became uncomfortable, another station could become interested. His name opened doors, and then came 2012. This time, the problem was not a disagreement with the television boss. It was something much more serious. On February 14th, 2012, Careen Chepchumba was found dead in her apartment in Nairobi. She was only 26 years old. Her death immediately attracted enormous attention.
Former television anchor Louis Otieno was a man keen on setting the record straight with regard to 26-year-old Careen Chepchumba Kili, found dead at her apartment on the 14th of February.
Louis Otieno's name entered the story because of his association with Careen. Suddenly, his private life was no longer private. Questions began surrounding their relationship. Questions surrounded the events leading up to Careen's death, and questions were being asked about Louis. This was a completely different position for someone who had spent years controlling interviews. Louis denied wrongdoing.
The fact is that following the unfortunate demise of Careen, a number of persons, all of whom knew the deceased in one way or another, have been contacted by the police to determine whether or not they have useful information regarding the incident. I confirm that I have been in touch with the police at Kilimani Police Division on several occasions, as is the case with several other persons, and I am certain that I will be cleared of any wrongdoing or event that could have led to the unfortunate death of Careen.
The investigation continued, and ultimately, he was never convicted in connection with Careen's death. But a public controversy does not disappear simply because it does not end with their conviction. By then, Louis' name had been pushed into a national conversation that had nothing to do with television. The man who had built his career by putting powerful people under pressure was now experiencing that pressure himself. And for a public personality, reputation can be almost as important as the job itself. By 2015, Louis had stepped away from television career that had made him famous. For viewers who had been accustomed to seeing him on their screens, his absence was difficult to miss. There was no dramatic farewell that could explain everything. There was simply less and less of Louis. The industry continued moving, new presenters appeared, new television personalities became popular, and the audience moved with them. This is the part of the fame that is rarely discussed. When a celebrity leaves, the world does not necessarily stop. Television still has to broadcast, news still has to be presented, programs still have to run, someone else eventually sit in their chair, and the person who once seemed irreplaceable can slowly become a memory. For Louis, however, disappearing from television was only the beginning. Because while his professional life was changing, his personal life was about to become even more difficult. The years that followed brought serious health problems. Louis developed medical complications that required treatment and placed enormous pressure on him and his family. Then came one of the cruelest blows imaginable for someone whose career depended on communication. He lost his hearing.
One morning, I wake up and I can't hear the nurse. Just like that. I can't hear the nurse. And she's coming in, like, good morning, you sleep on that normal drill. And I'm saying, stop, I can't hear you. And she's like, stop joking. And I said, I'm not joking, I cannot hear you. I was discharged in 2 weeks.
The man whose voice had been heard across Kenya could no longer hear normally. His physical condition also deteriorated. Walking became difficult. Moving around became difficult. Ordinary things that most people never think about suddenly became challenges. And there was another problem. The television career was already gone. The income associated with these years as a high-profile presenter was no longer coming in, but medical expenses continued. Treatment continued. Life continued. And the money that had once represented success was now being used to keep him going. By 2018, Louis' financial and health struggles had become public. The contrast was painful. Only a few years earlier, he had been one of the most recognizable faces in Kenyan media. Now he was asking for help to deal with his problems that had completely changed his life. Louis' financial problems eventually became impossible to hide. The money he had accumulated during his successful years could not protect him from years of his medical expenses. His family became involved in supporting his treatment, loans were taken, savings were used, and the comfortable life associated with his television career became increasingly difficult to maintain. At one point, his Nairobi home was advertised for auction. For someone who had once occupied such a powerful position in Kenyan society, the image was difficult to comprehend. A television star who had once interviewed some of the country's most powerful people was now facing the possibility of losing his own home. This was no longer simply a story about a celebrity who had disappeared from television. It was becoming a story about how quickly financial security can disappear when the income stops and serious illness begin. Perhaps one of the most painful parts of Louis' story was not the money, it was the silence. During his years of fame, his phone was constantly busy. People wanted to talk to him, people wanted his attention, people wanted to work with him. His name carried weight, but after the television career disappeared, things changed. The calls became fewer, the invitations disappeared, the industry moved forward without him. And Louis was left to experience something that many former celebrities eventually discovered. Fame creates a very large circle, but not everyone in that circle stays when the fame disappears.
They did nothing for me. I was operating on God's grace.
The difference between being needed and being remembered can be enormous. Louis had once been surrounded by people because he was Louis Otieno, the television star. Now people had to know Louis Otieno, the man. And those are two very different things. It will be easy to tell Louis' story as if one controversy destroyed everything. But the reality was more complicated. The controversy surrounding Careen Chepchumba's death became a major moment in his public life, but Louis was never convicted of her death. His career decline involved more than one event. There were professional conflicts, the media industry was changing, his television career eventually ended, and then his health problems became increasingly serious. The financial consequences followed, each problem added another layer, and eventually, the Louis Otieno people remembered from television was almost completely absent from the public eye. But he never completely disappeared. He continued speaking about his life, he continued defending his reputation, and he continued trying to find a way forward. Because losing a career does not necessarily mean losing the desire to rebuild. Years after his disappearance from mainstream television, people began asking the same question: what happened to Louis Otieno? The answer was not one event, it was a chain of events, a successful television career, professional battles, a major public controversy in 2012, the end of his television career around 2015, serious health problems, hearing loss, financial difficulties, and years away from the spotlight. By the time people began seeing his story again, the Louis Otieno they remembered from television was no longer the same man. But perhaps that is the wrong way to look at it. Because the man sitting behind the television desk was only one version of Louis Otieno. The person who survived everything that came afterward was another. And that person had experienced something television could never prepare him for: being famous and then becoming invisible. For years, Louis Otieno was one of Kenya's most recognizable television personalities. Then the cameras went dark, but his story did not end there. The television king disappeared from the screens, but the man behind the screen was still fighting to be heard.
Hello, my name is Louis Otieno. For those who I'm familiar to, I've missed you. I hope to see you soon. I plan to be back with a program called The Second Act.